In almost every competitive field, from content creation to venture capital, success follows a predictable, lopsided pattern. A tiny fraction of individuals seem to effortlessly hoard the vast majority of resources and attention, while everyone else fights over the remainder. In 1968, sociologists Robert K. Merton and Harriet Zuckerman investigated this imbalance within the scientific community to find the root cause. They noticed eminent scientists consistently received the lion's share of public credit for collaborative work, even when their contributions were identical to those of their unknown peers. They named this phenomenon the Matthew effect, drawing the title from the biblical parable of the talents. The parable outlines a harsh rule of accumulation. For to everyone who has will more be given, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. While it's tempting to blame a rigged system or personal bias for this concentration of success, Merton and Zuckerman's discovery pointed toward a deeper possibility, that the rich getting richer might be driven by a rigid mathematical logic that operates independently of human choice. To find the source of that logic, we have to look into network science, specifically how the World Wide Web grew in 1999. Researchers mapping the early web identified a concept called preferential attachment, the invisible hand that dictates how new links form across a network. Under this rule, an early node attracts more links simply because it is already highly connected. This initial microscopic lead accelerates. As the network grows, the gap widens proportional to the square root of time, making the leader impossible to challenge. This identical growth pattern appears in the cosmos, where the same rules of accumulation govern the birth of stars. Through gravitational instability, localized high-density areas exert a stronger pull, gathering more mass into a central point. This intense accumulation actively starves the surrounding cosmic areas, stripping away the material nearby stars would need to form. Whether the subject is internet routers or cosmic stardust, the mechanism is the same. Mass and connections inevitably flow to where they already exist in abundance. To see how this mathematical law interacts with human social influence, researchers created an experimental virtual market called Music Lab. For the control group, listeners were given no information about a song's popularity. In this vacuum, downloads were distributed relatively evenly, as users made choices based purely on their own musical taste. But for the experimental group, the researchers displayed a running total of download counts for every song on the list. The data showed that a tiny, random, early lead for a single song triggered a cascade of social influence. This created a massive monopoly that completely overwrote the actual quality of the music. This laboratory effect maps directly to real-world career progression, as seen in a massive study of Dutch science funding. Researchers who scored just a fraction of a point above a funding threshold secured twice as much future money as those who fell just below it, even though their work was virtually identical. Whenever a system exposes performance rankings or initial capital, it activates the Matthew effect algorithm. It guarantees that early, often random, momentum will dictate the final winner. While the accumulation of advantage is powerful, the dark inverse of this law is even more significant: the cycle of cumulative disadvantage. Psychologist Keith Stanovich documented this process by tracking how young children acquire reading skills in primary school. A slight early struggle with reading causes a child to dislike the activity, leading them to practice less. Because they practice less, they fall further behind their peers, widening a gap that began as a microscopic difference. Everything changes at the critical pivot point in schooling, when the curriculum shifts from learning to read to reading to learn. Once textbooks become the primary tool for education, that initial reading deficit snowballs. Science, history, and math become exponentially more difficult because the foundational skill needed to access them is missing. This compounding disadvantage acts as a gravitational force, systematically pushing the vulnerable further into failure as the mathematics of the system work against them. Left to run naturally, even systems built for equity, like open science, will result in extreme inequality. Without intervention, the compounding nature of advantage will always favor those who already have the most resources to exploit the system. Because the Matthew effect is a naturally occurring law of networks and physics, true equity cannot happen by accident. If we want a fair society, we must actively and continuously engineer friction to counteract the inescapable gravity of advantage.